Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this event. We'd like to welcome our viewers over our social media channels. Welcome to the fifth session of the Open Talk sessions with Mr. Khalaf Al Habtoor, and our topic today is Ask Me About Sheikh Rashid. In this session, we will get to know this unique leader who left quite a significant trace on humanity. I'd like to welcome our esteemed guests, Mr. Khalaf Al Habtoor, His Excellency Khalifa Nabuda, Hamad bin Sogat, and Ghafar Hussein, and our guests here, our viewers. Today, I am joined in welcoming with Mr. Jassim Al-Bastaki, who is an Emirati businessman. I'd like to welcome you here, and it's our pleasure to have you here. And I'd like to also greet our colleague, Mr. Yusuf Al-Mamari, who's usually with us, but today he left the room for Mr. Jassim to join us. But of course, his effect is always around. We'd like to welcome him. And before we start, I'd like to remind you that there's a hashtag that we're using for our social media viewers, which we will be receiving the questions using those hashtags. And these hashtags will be visible on the screen in front of you online. And this one we're using usually, which is KH Open Talk. And the Arabic one, hashtag Hawar Sarih. Mr. Jassim, please, at the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, in the name of Allah, most merciful, most gracious, Mr. Khalaf Al Habtoor, Mr. Khalifa Nabuda, Mr. Ghafar Hussein, and Hamad bin Sogat, in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most gracious. And in the beginning, I'd like to thank Mr. Khalaf Al Habtoor for providing the opportunity for sessions like these and for these types of intellectual and cultural talks and these open and honest talks. And honestly, today we are talking about a persona, a significant persona, a leading persona who has been way ahead of his time in his wisdom, in his perseverance, in his love for his country and for his people. May Allah have mercy on his soul. Sheikh Rashid Saeed Al Maktoum, he was our father, the founding father of the Emirate of Dubai, and the joint co-father of the UAE, along with his brother Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan. May Allah have mercy on his soul. And before we start this session with Mr. Khalaf Al Habtoor and his esteemed guests, who have been actually some of the founding fathers and the closest friends and companions of Sheikh Rashid. Mr. Khalaf, before I start, and before we start asking about Sheikh Rashid, can you tell us, please, a little about Sheikh Rashid? In the name of Allah, the most merciful, most gracious, in the beginning, we want to read the Al-Fatiha, the Quran verse of Fatiha. Sheikh Rashid bin Saeed, I think he was the son of the Sheikh Hamad bin Sogat, was his companion, and Mr. Bunabil, Mr. Bukhalid, and myself, probably in the end of the line, because I don't want to put myself ahead of my esteemed colleagues here, because they know him better than I do. And I got to know this man when I was young, and I will explain to you this a bit later. This man has a lot of qualities, not just one. He's wise, he's generous, he's decisive, and he is a very active human being. He's full of life. He loved life. He always loved to be on top, in the first one, ahead of everyone. He didn't like to get flattered and complimented by people. He was a very down-to-earth man. He knew what he was, And he was, and this is the man that I knew, and I have a lot more to say, but I wanted to start on this note. Of course, Sheikh Rashid, who was born in 1912, and he passed away in 1990, in October 7th, and he ruled the Emirate of Dubai since the 50s and contributed to the establishment of the union along with Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan. And during his leadership and during his governance, he really took the lead to build the Emirate of Dubai. And of course, Mr. Khalaf, he planted a seed here, a very, very important seed, of course, after the Brits left this country. How would you describe his vision in forming the government since its inception or since its initial stages? Did he have a committee that he consulted? Did he have any consultants or companions at that time? Yes, there's probably two streams to this. Because in the beginning, one stream is about the beginning of his governance, or the other stream would be around the time of in 1968 when Mr. Heath, the Prime Minister of Britain, announced that they will be leaving this country. So on both streams, actually I will leave Mr. Bunabil to talk about this, to talk about what was it like when the British left this country. Honestly, as Mr. Burashid had stated, and Mr. Jassim yourself, in the beginning of the governance of His Highness Sheikh Rashid, he was born actually in 1911. Before Sheikh Saeed bin Maktoum took the rule, and he was the grandfather, who was the grandfather of Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid. At that time, Saeed bin Maktoum became a ruler in 1912, and Sheikh Rashid at the time was 1 year old. And when he became a young man, all eyes were on him because he was a strapping young man who took on a lot of responsibility, and he stood by his father and he stood by his family. And I wrote this and I talked about this in an article a few days ago, and he managed to persevere through around the troubles that used to take place at the time. Because some people think that Sheikh Rashid used to rule Dubai from 1958. That's the official story. But after the issue of Al-Wahila, which took place in September 1930, he took charge right then, unofficially, from the 1930s. And he's been the effective ruler of Dubai since then. But as far as I'm concerned, there is one incident, of course, amongst many, that I can recall now that show the personality of Sheikh Rashid. And Sheikh Ahmad at the time was with us in Karachi, and I was in the municipality. I was one of the executives in the municipality. I brought some issues to show to Sheikh Rashid. He saw them, and I had sort of excused myself to go back to Dubai that day, and the plane was waiting, and he told me no, that I was summoned by Bhutto, who was at the time president of Pakistan. He invited him to dinner. He invited Sheikh Rashid to dinner at the time. So Sheikh Rashid asked me to accompany him, and therefore refusing to grant me permission to go back to Dubai. And we were supposed to have dinner with Dhul Fakkar Bhutto, which in a village next to Karachi. And I went with him, and this was the first time Ali Bhutto would meet with Sheikh Rashid. And Sheikh Rashid at the time told me, which I don't remember now if Sheikh Hamad was with us in the same session with Dhul Faqar in Karachi, but at the time he was the council of the UAE. His name was Hamad Al Kuwaiti from Al Ain. He was the Emirati council, and I think he's still there. Ali Bhutto told Sheikh Rashid that he told him, I've never met you before, I've never had the honor to meet you before, but I heard a lot about you from leaders all over the world. And he mentioned a word that the Shah of Iran said at the time, and at that time actually it was the height of the power of Iran. He said that, the Shah of Iran said that if I were to count the wisdom and the leadership of the rulers around us, Sheikh Rashid would be the first one I would put on top of that list. And of course, this is a huge testimony to His Highness Sheikh Rashid, because this is coming from a Shah who was at the height of his power, on top of a country at the height of its power at the time. So this is a huge indicator that Sheikh Rashid was indeed the wise and strong and perceptive man that he was, and that we know him now. Mr. Hamad bin Sogat. Mr. Hamad, I'd like to ask you about Sheikh Rashid. Was he a poet? Was he a poet? Was Sheikh Rashid, did he love poetry? Did he love the Nabati poetry? Yes, yes he did. But he was not a poet. He loved poetry, but he was not a poet. He used to love the poetry of Al-Mutanabbi, who's a famous Arabic poet. Of course, you were a very close companion of Sheikh Rashid, and you were really close to him. What used to anger him? I don't think anything used to anger him, actually. I never saw him angry, actually, because he never got angry. But what pleased him then? Everything pleased him. I tried to take the social side of Sheikh Rashid. I wanted to sort of talk about his love for poetry, and of course at that time I'd like to actually ask about this. So, Mr. Noor, do you have any questions before we get into this part of Sheikh Rashid's character? I just want to point out that Hamad was a companion, was a close friend to Sheikh Rashid bin Saeed, and he used to go with him for shooting in Pakistan, in Iran, and all of these areas that surround us. And that sport was really big at the time, and he used to share all these activities with him. He used to love the poetry of Mutanabbi, and the speaker is reciting a verse from the Mutanabbi poetry. Of course, to reiterate the words of Sheikh Hamad, of Mr. Hamad here, Sheikh Rashid used to love poetry, and he used to love the poetry of Al-Mutanabbi. And I recall that we were at an event in where there was a huge project, an oil drilling project at that area, sort of a really historic, monumental project where a barrel of oil was dunked into the sea. It was a bit of an oil drill that was put together by an American company, but we went there and we were taking a look at the different stages of the extraction of oil. And Sheikh Rashid at the time, you know, he wasn't, when we traveled, we didn't really travel with as many people as we do now. All of these properties that you see around, for Sheikh Rashid, it was completely different. So we were there, and I was asked by some of our friends who were there, I was asked to give a little speech at the event, and I gave a speech and I quoted the poetry of Al-Mutanabbi, who it was a very famous verse that kind of gave a lot of greatness and a lot of importance to, or it was a big testimony to the character of great leaders. And I actually used that verse to reflect on the character of Sheikh Rashid, and that really pleased him at the time. And the few verses that I had memorized of Al-Mutanabbi, he actually picked up the microphone and he finished off the whole poem. And that was just a little anecdote that I wanted to share as proof about his love for poetry. Sheikh Rashid was a political man, and one of the, who was one of the closest politicians to Sheikh Rashid? If you can answer us as a companion to him. Sheikh Rashid was one of the people who used to consult with everyone, the small and the big, the people who agreed with him and people who didn't. He would ask for the perspective of as many different, as different of parties as possible. And he would try to really get to the bottom of everyone's point of view. And then he would get the whole story and then make a decision. So he wouldn't just take exclusively from one person or the other. His decision or his wisdom took in account the whole perspective. So, and you had a lot of people who were around him at the time, and some of them really had significant opinions, and some of them were just there to try to learn. So even those people, he took their advice, he took the time to listen to what they had to say. But Sheikh Rashid, because of his experience, because of his wisdom, he really knew what he was doing, be it from a political perspective or an economical perspective as well. I have a little bit of an example. I was an executive in Dubai Customs, and the port, Rashid Port at the time had just opened, about 3 or 4 years into its opening. So Sheikh Rashid, in the beginnings of winter, he would go and camp in Jabal Ali. He would stay there for about a couple of weeks. And in the morning, he'd go to his office, he'd have lunch in Zabil, and then he would be accompanied by some of his friends and some of his executives, and they'd have dinner together and then go back. That day, he told me, Khalifa, I want you to come over. Could you please come over? And I went, I prayed the Maghrib prayer at his office, and he told me, let's go take a walk together. So we walked for a bit, and it was further down, and I got really curious, and I wanted to understand what was going on. And he told me, I'd like to open a port here. And he was pointing with his hands to the sound, with his finger to the sand. He said, I want to open a port here. I put my hand on my head like that, and I said, Your Highness, Rashid Port only has 3 ships at the time. And we had 15 docks for these ships. And then he said, no, that's not how it goes. That's not how it works. Because you think this port is for you or for your children or for for me or for my children, it's not. And I said, sir, Your Highness, I think Dubai needs other things. We already have a port that's not really full. And he said, no, we have the money. The banks know we have the money. We know we have the money. And if we do not use it to create this port, then it's going to go away. So let's start Jabal Ali port. So, and at the time, indeed, we really didn't have ships to fill up the docks of Rashid port. So I mentioned the story as an example to show you that he had a vision, a really perceptive vision, and a long-term vision, not just to see what's applicable now for him, for his children, and for the children of his children, but he saw really far ahead in the future. And look at us now, and look at how we utilize the Jabal Ali port. And it's amazing. And this is an indicator, of course, of his perception and of his strategic view. And that's what Mr. Khalaf Al Habtoor reiterated on as well. Ms. Noura, there's a question. Yes, we have a lot of questions that came through from our viewers from social media. And I'm going to ask a question that we got from social media. And in the meantime, I'd like to ask all the audience to write down any questions they have as well, because I'll take their questions. This question is to Mr. Khalaf. They're asking us that they're saying that they can see your pictures with Sheikh Rashid. Question is, how did you meet Sheikh Rashid the first time, and what was your first impression of him? Thank you. For me, when I was a kid, I would always hang out with my dad and my brothers. I never left their side. One of these days, my dad told me, I want you to come with me to Sheikh Rashid. He's a man that you will really benefit from his wisdom in the future and now. So I went with my dad. When I first went in, of course, the majlis had around 50, 60 people. I was a bit kind of restless, and I was scared and intimidated. There were too many people, and I wasn't really used to having this many people around. And the next day, I told my dad, I don't want to go. It was a bit scary for me, but my dad told me, just wait, be wise. Next time I take you, the minute you go inside, just look Rashid in the eye and forget there's anyone else in the majlis. And my dad told me, and he wasn't really kidding around, because his register was quite strong when he told me that. He said, this man in front of you, this is what you need to focus on. Don't look at anyone else. Even if they come talk to you, do not talk to anyone else. Just go to His Highness Sheikh Rashid, go directly to him, say hello to him, and forget there's anyone else. So I did that the first time, I did that the second time, and a third time. And then I became addicted. Instead of, I started going every day. I started going not just once a day. I would go at 6 o'clock in the morning, and then noon, and then 7 p.m. Addicted to the company of His Highness. Because every session I had with him, every time I sat with him, I benefited a lot. And that's how I met him. That was the beginning. Excellent. I'll take another question. Go ahead, please. Peace be on you. Saeed Al-Murdi, I'm a Saudi businessman, and I'm very happy to be here. Honestly, there is something, a quality that the rulers of the Emirates, the UAE, and the rulers of Saudi, all of them possess. It's the inspiration. They have this quality of inspiration that they inspire other people, even though it's such an intuitive quality. And you, Mr. Khalaf, you took from that, and we can see that kind of trickling down through us. And we saw that in Sheikh Rashid, and we saw that in Sheikh Zayed. And this is a really important quality. And I think I have a small request. the inspiration that you got from Sheikh Zayed and from Sheikh Rashid, I'd like to request from you to give it all over, and not just keep it within Dubai or just within the UAE, but all over the Gulf. And for us in Saudi Arabia, would like to actually use this inspiration as well. Thank you. Thank you so much. Now that we're live streaming this event, of course, everyone is able to see us, everyone is able to watch us. And our wisdom is from His Highness Rashid bin Saeed, that I can say that I personally learned from him. He was an institution, he was a school. And he wasn't just somebody that had these personal traits that were personal to him. I describe this man. This man used to wake up in the morning, pray the Fajr prayer, and then go around and visit the different people who lived under his rule, and he would check on them, who needed, if he would see if somebody needed anything, that he would be able to provide for them. And for me, this is fascinating, because in our world, in this day and age, this actually reminds me of one of the Prophet's companions, Umar ibn al-Khattab, who was one of the Khalifas after the Prophet. And I honestly see a lot of similarities between the two, because he managed to actually get these traits, to give them to his children, and then they gave them to their children as well. And that's how we are able to get the fruits of this wisdom right now. It's through the different generations that came from His Highness Sheikh Rashid bin Saeed. Rashid bin Saeed did not like, he had a certain level of lifestyle that he loved to propagate, which encouraged activity, which encouraged waking up early in the morning and being as productive as possible and getting to know as many people around you as possible. So he loved this productiveness in men and women in our society. He never discriminated with people based on anything, really. So there's a lot of things that we're going to talk about, and it's all similar to this. We'll take another question from the audience. Mr. Saif? No, we will not take a question from Mr. Saif. Nura, I used to wake up in the morning with Sheikh Rashid. I would meet him, and we would go out for walks together, once in Jumeirah, once in Hur al-Ans, and we would watch these projects grow. Sheikh Rashid really he made the country what it is now. He made Dubai what it is now. He would see that if someone wasn't working, he would poke them to get up and go to work. And everyone was scared to tell Sheikh Rashid if they slept a little too much in the morning. So, Mr. Mohammed, tell us about Rashidiyya. Sheikh Zayed used to when we'd come back, I used to see Sheikh Rashid and Sheikh Zayed together. Once I'd spoken to Sheikh Rashid, I told him that he's explaining a situation where they were visiting one of the projects, and at the time I told Sheikh Rashid that I want a house in this particular area that we had visited at the time. So I built a house around that area, and he helped me do that. And it was a lot of he managed to actually help me sort of get the whole thing together. And he never let me need anything, really. This is in Rashidiyya. We're talking about this area of Rashidiyya. And Rashidiyya is an area that was the first area that Sheikh Hamad bin Sogat used to live in, and now it became one of the biggest areas in Dubai, really. But it was one of the very first areas where saw any kind of building in Dubai. Yes, Mr. Esteemed panelists, my question is, by observing these pictures, Sheikh Rashid seemed to have a lot of companions, not just from Emiratis or from people from inside Dubai or coming from Dubai, but also on an international level. So that means that he used to consult with people not just locally, but from all over the world. So can you comment on that and talk about his consultation about all these different people? Yes. So a lot of the days, in one of the days where I was around him a lot and I wouldn't leave his side, he used to have a parliament where you can see actually the true manifest of democracy. And it was a really true democracy, not like the kind of democracy that you see outside. And I'm not going to say, I'm going to specify any names, but we would have in the House of the Union. So it's kind of like Hyde Park. It was like a Hyde Park situation. We would pray the Maghrib prayer, and then we would sit together. Initially, it would just be the close companions. And His Highness Sheikh Rashid would talk about something. He would throw in a topic, and then everyone would give their opinions and start discussing this topic. And then he would just walk out. He would stand up and walk out. And he had already made a decision about that particular topic. We wouldn't know what the decision is, but he'd walk out. I recall as well that there was another consultant, another guy that was there. He would come and he would speak a lot and really say nothing of value. Yeah. We have two questions from the audience. From Bastakia. Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for putting together this panel and for this talk. And honestly, my late father used to speak about His Highness Sheikh Rashid, and he had a lot of stories. And once I heard my father talk about the knight, the horseback rider, Sheikh Rashid. And he said that once he was racing on a horse, and while he was racing, he hit a palm tree and he fell down. And then at the time, my father said that they all thought he was hurt, but then they realized that he just stood up and went back on top of the horse and continued. Did you see that? Can you talk about the courage of His Highness Sheikh Rashid? And my second question is, when Rashid bin Saeed, when he used to travel, he would watch how the world works, and he would see projects all over the world. But he would only pick projects that are compatible for Dubai, that would work in Dubai. How did you think he knew which project worked for Dubai and which project didn't? First of all, I think Mr. Hamad would talk about the horseback riding activities of His Highness, because I don't know much. So, what did he used to? Did he used to play or horseback ride? Yes, he did. And yes, he did. After the war, every afternoon there would be a collection or a group of horseback riders who would engage in this activity in Dubai. Yeah, the second question was about the projects. So how did he pick these projects? How did he know which project worked for Dubai? So, Mr. Bounabil, you are, of course, one of the founders of Dubai municipality, so this is a good question for you. If you came to Sheikh Rashid and he gave you a project, for example, 50, 60 villas constructions, he would ask you questions, and then he would look at the project, and he wouldn't give it for this particular person, for example, but he would give it to someone else who would know exactly how to utilize the execution of this project. So he knew who was even fit to run these projects. So honestly, Sheikh Rashid, one of his qualities, and it's a huge, it's a really important quality to speak of, which is something that a lot of people remember about him, was that he used to engage a lot in a lot of, or he used to communicate a lot with people, generally speaking. He would have his majlis, these sessions where he would host a lot of people to talk up and discuss the topics that mattered. And he would wake up early, very early in the morning, 5:30 a.m., right after the Fajr prayer, and he would sit in his house in Zabil. And before Zabil, for example, he would be in his father's house in Shandaga. And shortly after that, he would take his car and he would go out around the country, and he would see how businesses are running and how things are going. And he'd go back to his office, in his famous office in Al Khor, or next to the creek, which at the time it would be shortly after noon. He'd go home and rest, have lunch, rest a little bit, and then after that he would go back again to talking to people, to discussing different things with people. And then around Al-Maghrib time, which is sunset, he would either sit in an office or in a house that he had built next to his office in Zabil. And then he would have his companions over, and they would have dinner and continue these discussions. So as you can see, his daily schedule, it was just full of interactions with all types of people. And it was this type of lifestyle and these types of interactions that gave him the wisdom that he became known for in the future. And he gave the space, he gave the microphone, he gave the podium to so many different voices around them. And even to a point where there were a lot of people coming to him, and they got a bit informal with him, and they would speak, they'd speak sort of intuitively and informally. And one day, he had one of his executives or one of his companions, who they were sitting in a session. There was this person who used to talk a lot. He was talking there, so he thought that Sheikh Rashid was upset because this guy wouldn't stop talking, and he was too informal, and he might have been disrespectful. So I asked this guy to stop talking, but Sheikh Rashid looked at me and told me, "No, you stop talking and let him finish." Of course, the speaker is not saying he was the one who said that. He is quoting this from his friend. So the friend said, or Sheikh Rashid said to the friend that we should never stop anyone from talking, regardless of what they are saying, because everything has value. So as you can see, these types of interaction sort of led him to be the man that he was. And you can see now, a lot of rulers do not allow themselves these types of opportunities to talk to different people. But he was really different. He was the first one to create a commercial council. And the Dubai Chamber has been established since 1949, and in 1957 he had a popular council for the public, which had around 37 people, which wasn't really restrictive to Emirati nationals. There were all types of expats from different classes who used to live in Dubai. You had the doctors, and you had the traders, and you had the laborers, and everybody had a voice. So if we want to talk about him from this angle, you can see that there are many stories that speak to his quality in this regard. And I don't know if we can find people like him now around. And this is the man who used to communicate a lot with people, and he would learn from people, and gave him this humility to take up as much as possible from the people around him. And one of his traits that benefited specifically businessmen around this area, I think, and if some of them were here, they would definitely agree with me. Sheikh Rashid used to, if he saw that somebody had any type of enthusiasm to grow something, then he would be the first one to actually go and sponsor you, loan you money, get you set up, and he would give you the complete freedom to grow that business that's coming out of your passion. But the important thing for him is that he needed to see what passion that you have. And all of these things, of course, we can speak for days about these qualities without end, and it will still not be sufficient. Your Excellency, you spoke about a lot of amazing points, amazing qualities about Sheikh Rashid. I think Mr. Ibrahim Jama has a question. My question is, there's a bit of a, for example, if we wanted to, the project of the tunnel, building a tunnel. I think you should ask my father. The tunnel of Shandaga, the idea of building the tunnel. We used to sit in the office of Sheikh Rashid. We would go and greet him. And one day, somebody asked him for something. He asked him, I think the issue of the tunnel came up in this session, and went along. And of course, if we wanted to talk about the history of Dubai, since the beginning of this urban development of the city, we would go back to the grandfather of Sheikh Rashid bin Maktoum, who put the foundation of these commercial projects that grew in Dubai. This man sent a lot of different delegations to the ports that surround this area, and to Saudi Arabia, to Qatif, to Dammam, to Khobar, to Al-Hassa, and Zubair, all of these different cities in Saudi Arabia. And Zubair is an area next to Kuwait as well. He would send these delegations made of traders. He would ask them, because he was thinking of establishing a port at the time, and he wanted to build a port. Actually, at the time, there was a port in Iran, Linje port in Iran, who the Shah of Iran at the time had lent the port to different European countries, and he had huge and high customs rates to ensure or they were really high customs in that port, so it wasn't really doing very well because of the expenses, the high expenses, until Sheikh Maktoum built or put the foundations of building, constructing the area around where Rashid Port is, to make it as urban as possible in order to pave the path for the development of this port. And then Rashid bin Saeed took the lead after that, and took up from the wisdom of his grandfather, and he established all of these urban projects in Dubai. And if we look at the history, everything that was started in this country started in Dubai. Electricity, ports, tunnels, roads, all of these things started in around in Dubai, actually. And you know, in the 50s, where things like a municipality, nobody really thought about kind of putting together something like that. And at the time, Sheikh Rashid did do that here in Dubai. And all of these things, they are the foundation of the urban development that Dubai is known for now. And I think one of the biggest or the most unique things about this city is that it is actually continuing on this path, the path of development that His Highness Sheikh Rashid has taken over from his grandparents, and now his children and his grandchildren are taking over after him. And as you can see, the apple doesn't really fall far from the tree here, and it's an entire generational perception to establish a really wise vision that was ahead of its time. And Dubai, one of the biggest selling points for it, one of the biggest traits is that it was really huge on trade. And being a trade, the quality, the personality of a trader is that they have to be someone who's very open-minded, who's very willing to speak to so many different diverse groups of people. And they realize that trade is the base of development. If there's no trade, there is really no development. Mr. Bounabil, I want to pick up where you stopped and talk about trade. And Dubai, of course, it must have gone through an economic crisis before or around the time of Sheikh Rashid. Mr. Khalaf, did it really happen? Was there an economic crisis around Sheikh Rashid's time, and did he fix it? So, Mr. Bounabil, I think, knows more than I do, but for me, we grew up in Shandaga. There was a tent, in a tent we grew up. It was 5 of us who lived there. And in the beginning, Rashid bin Saeed, and not to speak about the past, but he revived Dubai. He gave it life that really didn't, you know, even the days of Maktoum and Sheikh Saeed, Al Maktoum, he was a religious man, he was a man of religion. But the real ruler, the real visionary was Rashid bin Saeed, even before he became the official ruler of Dubai, as we mentioned in the beginning of this session. And around my time as well, when we were learning, when we were studying, after Rashid increased the creek, he increased the reclamation of water, of land, and we saw early on that this man is a genius. He had an incredible vision, and this was before the union and during the union and in the beginning of the union. He wasn't, he was a very, he loved clarity and he loved things to be straightforward, and he saw nothing but success in front of him. And I keep saying that over and over again. He's the one who put the foundation of success of Dubai. And if we compare, I mean, if he gets back from the grave and he sees what Mohammed bin Rashid, His Highness Mohammed bin Rashid is doing now, he would be fascinated to see that everything that he put forth has grown into this wonderful reality that we live now. And for me, this is what I grew up watching, this is what I grew up being exposed to. And all of this keeping in mind that he really hated flattery, by the way. He hated being flattered. I remember we were sitting in a session, and this poet came, And he told him, "Sit down, I don't want to hear from you." And the poet was a bit surprised, and he said, "I know you're going to start flattering me because I know who I am and I know what I'm doing and I don't need any flattery." He said, "Come sit with us, have coffee, but I do not want to hear you flatter me." Is that right? Yeah. Sheikh Rashid, he loved consulting people. He consulted everyone, even during the days of the Union, when there'd be topics that a lot of these prime ministers and ministers talk about. I remember me and Khalifa Nabuda, we used to, we'd talk about topics with all these ministers sitting there on the table. They wouldn't agree on something. For me, I personally, I called Ahmed Khalifa Suwaidi, who was the foreign minister at the time. He came to me, and I think it was a lot of other gentlemen as well. And he said, and him and I consulted in this topic that was there. So as you can see, it was a setting that Sheikh Rashid was testing us to see how we're gonna consult with each other to come with a decision. And he was a man that hated routine. He did not like to do the same thing over and over again. And once, I have an example, there was a guy who walked in. He came to Rashid and he told him, "This is my land, this is my money, you guys took my money." When I spoke to Sheikh Rashid about this, I wanted to talk to him, and Sheikh Rashid told me to be quiet because this man has the right to speak. And he listened to this man. And I followed, and at the time, the session when it ended, Sheikh Rashid walked away. He signaled to me to come and follow him. And he asked me, "Do you know this man?" And I said, "No, I don't." And Sheikh Rashid said this man was right. This was Sheikh Rashid. These were these examples are a testimony to who he was as a man and who he was as a leader. And he had a huge sense of perception, really. He loved this country, he loved his people. And he used to ask me about these traditional houses in the northern area in the country. He would ask me, "What did you build? What did you do? What did you put together?" And once, we're talking in general here. Once, as stressed as I was once, I took my car. Instead of going to Furda, I went to Ajman, because I used to build traditional houses in Ajman at the time. And I told Sheikh Rashid about this, and he said, "You're not allowed to drive from now on." And they got me a driver. And he told me, "This is the best thing we can do, that we'll get you a driver so that you make sure you're not tired at any point." The days of the war, the Iraq war, the Iraqi ambassador came in and they were discussing some of the movements of military aircraft in Ras Al Khaimah. And one other story, Sheikh Hamad bin Muhammad called me. He was the ruler of Fujairah. We're really good friends, and he's a dear, dear friend to me. And this is around the time of the Union. They said that they wanted to build hospitals in Fujairah. And at the time, I spoke to a Sheikh Surur bin Muhammad, who's also a good friend of mine. And Sheikh Surur, at the time, he was really busy. So the ruler of Fujairah told me, I want you to speak to Sheikh Rashid and ask him to help us with this. So I went to Sheikh Rashid. I told him that the ruler of Fujairah is requesting this. And Sheikh Rashid said, okay, talk to Sheikh Surur. So I called Sheikh Surur. And I told him that Sheikh Surur sometimes is busy and he's not really attending to it. And this is where you can see the wise leadership of Sheikh Rashid. I went back to Sheikh Rashid. He told me, call Surur again and talk to him. And I told him, please take an executive decision in this. And he said, I told him that I talked to Sheikh Surur, but he's not really responding that much. And Sheikh Rashid told me, go to him and take Mr. Hamad al-Midfa, who was at the time, he was the Minister of Health, and Muhammad bin Musa as well. We took a helicopter. I told him, don't fly next to the mountains because it's a bit dangerous. We went on top of the roads. We went to Al-Fujairah and he gave us an executive decision to actually build all these hospitals, and it worked out. During my research about Sheikh Rashid, I had a lot of different stories. There's a lot of points that I want to talk about, but I'm going to give the podium to Ms. Noura. Thank you. We're going to take a question from our viewers online, and then from our viewers here, and then we'll go back to you, Mr. Jassem. So this question online, I think this is probably for all of our panelists. After he passed away, or Sheikh Rashid passed away, do you think that there was something he wanted to establish or that he wanted to realize but didn't get a chance to achieve? What wasn't achieved from the vision of Sheikh Rashid is the question. Honestly, in my opinion, Sheikh Rashid, he had many more goals than what he had time to do and to achieve. And I was with him in the United States when he was sick, and we were in the plane, and this man was with me, my colleague next to me. And I sat next to him, speaking to the microphone, Mr. Abu Khalid. Yes, and he told me that we were going back to Dubai. At the time, he was really sick. Why are you talking to the other side? Talk to the people in front of you. Because she asked me. So he told me at the time, he said, when we go back to Dubai, we have this project and we have that project and we have this thing to do in Hatta. And he was talking to me about really huge projects that they weren't even in the inception phase. So this is a clear sign that when he passed away, his head was still full of ideas that never really had the chance to be established. And may God have mercy on his soul. And he was as well, he would prefer businessmen better, he would prefer their company better than his own ministers. He wouldn't really, like he was much more comfortable around businessmen. And you can see that because if you see all of his companions, the closest people to him are all businessmen. You never saw any of his ministers, with all due respect to all ministers, but he was a really strong businessman, and that sense of business leadership he put a lot of value in. Please go ahead. Somebody please pass a microphone to Dr. Khaled. Doctor, please go ahead. Thank you, Noura, and thank you, Burashid. First of all, after around 30 years from the day that he passed away, his presence is still felt in every corner of the city and in this session really, and in every monument in Dubai. So he's not with us. He's not physically with us anymore, but his presence is felt all the time and in every project that we embark upon. And I think, Abu Rashid, as well, you were right when you said that what Sheikh Rashid did is that he put the foundation of the city. And therefore, he is the founding father of Dubai. Which means that, you know, the rulers come and go, but the founding father is forever the founding father. So many things happen afterwards and so many people come and go, but the foundation never really changes. And the gratitude, all of our gratitude, ours and our the later generation, the future generations as well, all goes to him. This is my comment. I have 4 questions because there's 4 of you. And the first question is to Mr. Bushhab. Mr. Hamad. I'd like you to talk to us about the relationship of Sheikh Rashid and Sheikh Zayed. So, what was their relationship like? And if you know an example, if you would like us to put in your own words, what type of relationship did these two have? Because they have so much in common, and that visionary dynamic that they both share. There must be a lot to be said about the dynamic of their relationship and how they both founded this country. Sheikh Zayed is known by his generosity, his graciousness to people, and Sheikh Rashid is a similar manner, and both of them they complemented each other. Nobody had anything missing, but they complemented each other. They were the proper backbone of this country. And this is something that's felt. It's the enforcement, actually, as a realtor. That's what I'm going to be using. He was the reinforcement of this country. Did they consult with each other? Yes, of course they did. They consulted every day, daily, and all day, and for ages. They used to defer with they used to agree with each other, and they used to disagree with each other. And this is very important because disagreement is part of putting of establishing these types of relationships together. And when everything that used to these two used to communicate, it was never in the context of a fight. When they disagree, it was always a compliment. I have a question. He was known to not love journalists. He didn't like journalists, did he? Why? Why did he not like journalists? And he didn't like intellectuals either. He used to love businessmen. Why is that? He used to love businessmen and he used to love scientists, but his problem, or the problem, was that the press wanted nothing but to write about him all the time. And as we mentioned, he really hated to be the subject of any type of discussion. And he hated the flattery that was necessary and that came as a part of the press coverage at the time. And I think this is where the misconception kind of happened, because the press used to just get all of these quotes about him from different people that used to flatter him a lot, and that's not something that he liked. Mr. Bonabil, a question for you. Given the important role that Sheikh Rashid took, I have never seen a book that's published that lives up to be a proper testimony of him. Why do you think that is? There's really no book good enough about him. Honestly, we can't say that there was nothing written about him. He was written about. He was covered a lot in the press. And there were a lot of books that were written about him, but some of these writers that wrote these books, especially those who were kind of quite close to him, they wrote rather romantically about him. They weren't very factual about him. So there were some Westerners, some English books were written about him, which a book titled Father of Dubai. This book is really very informative, and some of this information probably might be a little bit exaggerated, but a big portion of it had a really good, significant information. And I personally prefer this book on any other book that was written about him here in Dubai. And of course, someone like Sheikh Rashid, or a ruler in the magnitude of Sheikh Rashid or Sheikh Zayed, he would be the subject of a lot of writing and a lot of coverage and a lot of discourse. But there would be some sort of in the eyes of the editor and the researcher who would write these books, he'd find a lot of negative things that could be written, and a lot of good things that could be written. And Sheikh Rashid, until now, I think you're right. There's no book that actually lives up to his testimony. And the last question is, a lot of men around Sheikh Rashid, and one of them is Mahdi Tajir, and Sheikh Rashid used to listen. He had his ear. Mr. Mahdi Tajir, he had his ear a lot. Can you please talk to us a little bit about the reason why he put this much trust in Mr. Mahdi Tajir, and why did he trust him a lot? Honestly, I can't comment on this because I knew Mahdi. I knew him in the capacity that he worked with me a little bit. When I used to talk to Sheikh Rashid, he would send me to Mahdi to give me a letter, and then it's kind of like an authorization letter that I would get from him all the time. But I can't really comment on his trust or Sheikh Rashid's trust in Mr. Mahdi. Maybe Mr. Bounabil can talk about this, or Mr. Khalifa, Mr. Hamad. I don't think he had that much trust. Rashid bin Saeed, in his nature, he used to listen to everyone. And I think there's always that illusion, or not even illusion, but he made everybody feel that he was the most important person to him. So I think that's part of that. And secondly, Mahdi came at a time where all of these people that you're talking about, and you compared Mahdi to them, they were all kind of students relatively. 18, 19, 20-year-olds. We didn't have somebody that was, bilingual. He was eloquent. He was sort of as educated as him. And I think, particularly about the speaking the bilingualism, and he would speak really good English, and he would help translate to him between all the different ministers. I think even Mr. Isa al-Gurg used to speak English at the time. Yes, Isa al-Gurg was there, but he had a job at the British Bank here, so he wasn't one of the close companions. Sheikh Rashid used to talk to Mahdi a lot because he enabled him this kind of linguistic. He had this linguistic ability to translate for him, and he was really beneficial. So essentially, there was a good opportunity for him to be there. Yes, we have two questions. I'd like to comment a bit, sorry, before we go to the questions. Mr. Rashid bin Saeed was a statesman, and a statesman always looks after the benefits of himself and of his country. Winston Churchill said, there is no permanent enemy or permanent friend to the UK, but there's permanent benefit. So Rashid bin Saeed was somebody that listened to anyone where he felt could be beneficial to the country and to the state. He would trust this person, he would bring him closer. And some of the employees or some of his companions at the time, he used to depend on him, and sometimes that dependency is slightly kind of a bit exaggerated, but I trust in his decision and his judgment that if that dependency was there, if that trust was given, then there must be a goal behind it. And in the end of the day, or at the end of the day, Rashid bin Saeed was a statesman. And I remember once we were attending a session, and Mr. Salim Al-Lodi was there, and I think a lot of you, a lot of you remember Salim Al-Lodi. He was a really big Arab journalist, and he was editor-in-chief of a magazine called Al Hawadith in Lebanon. And he was really known, a big writer, and he was, assassinated, I think. At the time, he came. And it was before, kind of during the days leading up to the Union. That's 1968 until 71, when the British forces were leaving. And when we were sitting down, and he asked Sheikh Rashid, they usually call you Machiavellian. And Sheikh Rashid had no idea what Machiavellian was. And you had a legal consultant in Dubai, his name is Adil Al-Bitar, and he wanted to explain what is being a Machiavellian is to His Highness Sheikh Rashid. So he explained it to him, and Sheikh Rashid still didn't understand what it meant. And in the end, I told Adil Bitar, the legal consultant, I told him, if you allow me, I will explain Machiavelli to His Highness. And I told him that to be Machiavellian is to utilize or to actually take benefit out of your enemy. And then Sheikh Rashid said, well, then it's a great thing. Then I'm proud to be one. Because if I'm taking advantage of my enemy before my enemy takes advantage of me, then that's a great thing. So as you can see, he was really a big statesman. And a statesman really looks after his country in whatever ways permitted. Yes, there's a question. Sorry, I cannot hear the speaker. I apologize, I cannot hear the speaker. There was... The British used to call him a fox, actually, and they used to trust him for one thing. And I remember in King Faisal, he was on his way to Malaysia, and the only place where he stopped to have some coffee is at Sheikh Rashid's. He stopped at Dubai International Airport. He came to Zabil, and he had a cup of coffee, and then he went back to Dubai and went back on his way to Malaysia. And it was the first Islamic summit. So when King Faisal said to Sheikh Rashid, he asked him, they told him that you didn't welcome the aides of the Arab summit. Sheikh Rashid said, no, I welcome them, of course, but I'm bound by contractions, by these contracts, and I respect these contracts. And King Faisal flattered him for his respect to these contracts, to these treaties. And this is also further testimony of his statesmanship. We have a question here from the audience. play karate. I have a black belt. And I am a free businessman. Is she playing karate? Yes, she plays karate. They thought His Highness Sheikh Rashid played karate.
شكرا.
يا ريت بتخلي قريب عليك.
Yes, fine. Okay. Thank you for the opening talk and give us that chance. وبغيت أسأل صراحة شو كانت نظرتها
I wanted to ask you, what was his vision of life? What was his vision of people, of the people of Dubai? What was his vision for the people of Dubai? How did he change Dubai from a desert to a paradise? Me personally, I learned, for me, I learned that the vision, or in the heart of this vision lay his optimism. And he had a huge optimism really, and which manifests itself in trust in people and in his country. And he loved life. And he knew that life was wonderful. But he also knew that life without success is not worth anything. And that was his vision, because he always aspired to be at the top. Dubai right now is the jewel of the Gulf, and the jewel of the whole world. And it's all because of his planning. You know, he never just planned for things that would happen in his lifetime, but he planned for years and years and probably centuries to come. When he passed away, when he died thinking about what he had in mind for this country. He never slept at night, and Hamad knows most about this. He always slept in the middle of something, in the middle of writing a note, or in the middle of going over a project. So he had this huge sense of life, and he was hugely optimistic. He didn't believe in pessimism. Pessimism was not allowed in his house. Of course, in any ways, we are grateful to Rashid. He was the first businessman here, Mr. Rashid Khalaf. He's the first businessman to put together something like this, and which is also on the trail of His Highness Sheikh Rashid. And this means that we are still on the right path, indeed going according to the vision of His Highness Sheikh Rashid. Please go ahead, we'll take a question. Please, let's keep the questions short so that we open the podium for many more people to ask questions. Please use a microphone. How did he get the idea to build Dubai? How did he plan? I'm sure he had a plan, a concrete plan. Yes, we answered that question already, so please go ahead.
Firstly, I want to say, can I ask in English? Firstly, I want to say thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to learn from all of you about such a great leader like Sheikh Rashid. I want to say, not all of us, we get the opportunity to be in direct company of such great men and learn from them. So my question to you is, I'm really interested to know, what would you say was the greatest impact of being in the direct company of Sheikh Rashid on each of you? What would you say was the greatest impact on you?
إذا بتحبوا ترجم السؤال أو عيدوا بالعربي, I will repeat the question in Arabic. الضيفة عم بتقول إنه لا يحظى الجميع بفرصة.
The guest said now that not everybody has the chance to be on a personal relationship or personal presence with Sheikh Rashid. So what was the biggest impact of your personal relationships with Sheikh Rashid on you? The impact
was positive. It was positive, and energy and the blood circulation in our body. This was the impact of Rashid bin Saeed. يعطينا الأمل, يعطينا الفيولينج, يعطينا كذا.
He would give us, this was his impact, he would give us, he taught us not to sleep a lot. That's a very, very important thing. And he taught us Whenever we'd sleep, we'd remember him and we'd immediately wake up.
شكرا لك دكتور كتب.
Thank you so much. Dr. Kutub, please go ahead. Peace be on you all.
السلام عليكم.
عليك السلام.
Assalamu alaikum.
لقد أجاد المشاركون في هذا
All of these participants have spoken very well about the wisdom of His Highness Sheikh Zayed.
اللي هو
I have a question.
موقف الشيخ زايد
I wanted to talk about
القضايا العربية
the position of Sheikh Zayed from the Arab issues of the Arab world firstly, and then secondly international issues, especially when it talks about, especially in the phase of independence or the different independence era of the different Arab world, different Arab countries. For example, the Palestinian issue or other countries that gained their independence at that time. He had really amazing positions or amazing. Are you asking about Sheikh Zayed or Sheikh Rashid?
Sheikh Rashid.
Sheikh Rashid, I'm sorry.
نعم
Yes, please. My name is Dr. Ishaq Al Qutub. I am the General Manager of the International Foundation of Student Aid, and it has a branch in Dubai. First of all, we welcome you here, Dr. Qutub. It's our honor for us to have you here. Welcome to your second country, your second home. I'll just say a couple of words and then I'll leave the room to my fellow panelists. Supporting Palestinians started before the union. It was in a direct order by Sheikh Rashid from the municipality of Dubai. We had 10% of every single interaction that happened here used to go to the benefit, to the help of, to the aid of our Palestinian brothers and sisters. And this was the first initiative of its kind to support our brothers and sisters in Palestine without having anybody to prompt them to do so. That was his idea, it was his approach. And that's firstly. So Rashid bin Saeed, at the time, before the union, we were separate emirates, and during that time of the independence, the time of Jamal Abdel Nasser, was given. He gave him a huge award. The biggest honor that was given from Egypt at the time, from Jamal Abdel Nasser, was given to His Highness Sheikh Rashid. So as you can see, Egypt was a huge country at the time, and Dubai was such a small emirate, and yet the highest honor, the highest presidential honor, was given from Egypt to His Highness, and that's really a testimony of his vision, of his wisdom, of the efforts that he put forth to help his brothers and sisters at the time. Honestly, Mr. Khalaf talked about this project, this initiative didn't even exist in the Gulf in the 60s, which was honestly, the municipality of Dubai used to give 10% of every transaction, send it straight through to Palestine. There was millions and millions of dirhams. The former Palestinian president Yasser Arafat used to receive that aid, and there was a relationship between the two. And I think Mr. Hamad was with Sheikh Rashid and Jamal Abdel Nasser at the time. Tell us a little bit about it. It was a great time, honestly. I want to point out that Sheikh Rashid was not a radical. He was a politician. He was a statesman. He looked after the benefit of his people, and he was a friend to everyone. He had no enemies. So he was friends with his fellow nations, and he cultivated relationships with them based on the mutual benefit to both of the countries. So he was not known as a radical, he was known as a statesman. We'll take another question because we're running out of time. Thank you so much for this discussion, for this talk. I'd like to thank you. We can't hear you. Can you please raise your voice? Thank you so much for this session. And thank you, Mr. Khalaf. First of all, we spoke a lot about the different sides to Sheikh Rashid, but there's one side that the fatherly side, I think, the fatherly side of Sheikh Rashid. Can we discuss that a little bit or briefly go over that? If you had witnessed anything, a particular way he behaved around his children. Please go ahead, Abu Khalid. Sheikh Rashid was from cared a lot about the personal issues of the people who lived under him. So he kept an eye on a lot of people's personal circumstances, and I am one of the people who lived around him. I have a daughter at the time. She was 7 years old. She broke her arm. So at the time, we didn't have hospitals that were like the hospitals we have now. So now they brought her a little cast. They put a cast on her hand. So after a little bit of time, the cast it became a bit. There was an infection. It got infected. So we were in London. We went to London, and Sheikh Rashid came. I don't know who actually told him, or who told the wife, his wife. Or I think word got to his wife, and his wife told him. And we went. I'm sitting the next day. I was sitting with him. I was sitting with him, and then the next day he told me, "Finish eating. There's a car waiting for you outside. We're gonna take you to the airport." We went to the airport.
Not your business. I'm taking them to hospital.
And at the time, things got really wrapped up really quickly, and he took us by plane to the hospital. And I went back to him and I asked, and I said, "How did you know?" And he actually reprimanded me, and he said that, "How did you not tell me? I was sitting with you for a few whole days. How could you not tell me that your daughter was going through that?" And he helped us. He helped my daughter overcome that infection that happened. And I'm just telling you, this speaks to his fatherly sense, to his. And as you can see, he did this to your daughter, so let alone his own children. Let's try to wrap up because it's coming to sunset now, to Maghrib prayer time. If there's another question.
I think a last question for me. Yes. Good evening, and thank you very much. Respects to the panelists on the dais. Most of the questions I was wanting to ask were already asked, but I'll mention a couple of anecdotes. 12 years back, I was sitting with my ex-boss, and he had met His Highness late Sheikh Rashid, and he mentioned a story which Sheikh Nabuda just mentioned about Jebel Ali Port.
Yes.
And he told me exactly the same words that his close aides held a head and said, you know, how is it possible? And I'm really happy to see that person who actually held his head in person. Well, I was in Spain and Switzerland last year on business. And, you know, we get to start speaking to people around, and they asked me, where are you from? So I'm being a proud Indian from Dubai. So I said, I'm an Indian from Dubai. And, you know, their eyes gasped. They said, wow, Dubai, really? And does it really have these tall buildings, and are these stories really true about everything being so big? So my question is on, did Sheikh Rashid really have that vision of people or countries outside the Gulf having a lot of awe about Dubai? And like Sheikh Habtoor rightly mentioned, the jewel of the world. Did he really envision Dubai being the jewel of the world in the 50s or 60s?
Well, I think if you're asking Sheikh Rashid himself if he's alive and you start warm up like this, he will kick you out. I mean, Sheikh Rashid, this is Jamaica. Dubai, they call it the pearl of the Gulf since long ago, before I born, because it is the hub between the East and the West. People benefiting from all over the world. Traveling, trading with India, Pakistan, Asia, all Asia, a lot of, to Africa, you know, all in the sea. This is why this country and this city is very successful, and the different mentality as well. Even, you know, as Mr. Abdul Ghaffar mentioned and now Mr. Khalifa mentioned, that I remember personally that a member of the board of directors of the Chamber of Commerce were Indians. Because, as Mr. Abdul Ghaffar said earlier, interest is priority number one. As they said, friend goes and come, enemy also it goes and come. Therefore, interest of the country is a priority number one. This was the vision of the late Sheikh Rashid rahmatullah alayh. And as I mentioned earlier, he concerned about the people of the country very much. After Salat al-Fajr, he drive, and Hamad bin Sogaz maybe with him, he drive all over Dubai to know if somebody in need anything. I call him Umar bin Khattab radiyallahu anhu.
رحمة الله.
رحمة الله عليه.
الأستاذ نورة السؤال من
تفضل.
Question. We're going to take a last question from our viewers over social media. I will say the question in English.
What were the hardest moments that Sheikh Rashid experienced, and what did he do when he faced them? ما هي أصعب المواقف التي واجهت الشيخ راشد؟ دائما نتكلم عن نجاحات.
What were the hardest moments that faced Sheikh Rashid? We always talk about his vision, we always talk about his perception, but can we talk about the hardship that faced him?
إذا سمحتوا المصاعب.
The hardships really.
إذا ما في مصاعب وتوربulence في الحياة.
If there's no turbulence in life, if there's no hardship, there will be no pleasure. And Sheikh Rashid, of course, faced a lot of hardships, but you never felt that really. And he'd come in. He wouldn't talk about it. You'd find out about it much later. If he was at a position where he needed to ask for consultation, he would ask everyone. I used to call it the Hyde Park corner, his villa in Jumeirah, because it was an open forum really for people to talk to him. But you never really knew if he was facing anything hard or anything really crippling. And he had a little bit of an ability to make any problem really like a minute small version of itself, and therefore he was able to overcome them without really anyone feeling that. And this is a gift that was given to him by God, and I personally have benefited so much from his wisdom, from what he was, the way he led his life. I didn't go to school. I went to school and I stopped it, but I learned from him. I learned from the institution that he was. Sheikh Rashid, there was a man came, and Muhammad bin Rashid was sitting there as well. This guy came and started talking about Sheikh Rashid. He said something. And I think he said something, he spoke in a way that I couldn't believe really. And I was really in awe about his ability, his eloquence to express his thoughts, honestly. Yes, so if we go on and talk about Sheikh Rashid, I think it's not enough for us to have a session like this to cover everything that he is. And Mr. Khalaf Al Habtoor, I'd like to realize the wish of Dr. Abdul Khaliq. I would like to transform this session to a book, really. So hopefully, Doctor, you have the panel here and you have all of these visionaries here. Maybe this is a project that we can take on. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. That's it. We're wrapping up. So thank you so much, and thank you everyone for attending.
منابير بيض الله ويوكم حماد خليفه مشكورين.